Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Abayim, once again to our Shir in the Maimarim of the Rebbe. Le'ilui Nishmas Aluschus Miriam Bas Befraim Ze'ev. Should have Yeridas on the Neshama Lamata, which that's the greatest aliyah. So we are now in very special days. We're Yud Gimel Tammuz. It's time of Chag HaGeula. So our learning Chassidus today is way on a higher level than other days because the day itself adds so much Kedusha to our learning. Especially, this is a Maimer that was said on the Chodesh Tammuz, Tav Shelamed Gimel. So it surely has extra meaning for the whole Chodesh Tammuz, which is Chodesh HaGeula. So we started the Maimer, which is from Parshas Perach. V'hinei Perach Mateh Aron. Aron's Mateh blossomed, Vayikmol Shkedim, and almonds came out. And we learned that this is connected to the union of Tefillah, because anything that has to do with Kayanim has to do with Zrizus, swiftness. Kayanim, Zrizim Heim, they're swift, they're quick. And what symbols this? The Shkedim, for two reasons. One reason the Rebbe says, because the word Shkedim is like the word Shaked. Shaked means quick, which is the Teichen of the word of the union of Shkedim. It's not just a name that was given. Shkedim itself grows very quick. That itself already represents union of quickness, of swiftness. It takes only 21 days to grow. But that's not enough. The Rebbe adds the name itself, Shkedim, is from the word shaked, which means quick. Like shaked ani al devarai. That Hashem says, I'm going to be quick in bringing about what I said. In order to understand it, to understand what's this idea connected to Aron, and it says, Birkas Kayanim is ad meheri yoretz devarai. It comes very quick, the bracha. In order to understand it, let's first explain the chlal, the inyan of tefillah. What is a bracha? A bracha is mloshen hamshacha, to bring down a certain oir, a certain hashpah, and this hashpah could come down in different ways. It could come quickly, it could come slow, it could get stuck on the way, it could end up coming down only in ruchnius, not a gashmius. And that's what we learned about in the past two shiurim. Basically, the Maimer, what we learned in the beginning, is that the Rebbe is here to answer a question. If we are ready, everything that's going to happen to the person during the year is already set aside by Rosh Hashanah. So why do we have to daven every day? You're getting your sustenance. You're getting your panos already. So why do we have to daven every day? So the reason is, like we learned in the Maimer, because every day we have to make sure that the hashpah materializes. It doesn't only stay somewhere up in Atzilus, but it comes out to this world. And we went into more details that when a person gets Rosh Hashanah a certain amount of hashpah for that year, what's actually taking place, that a chesed, that tzilus, is the source of all the sustenance, and that comes down for each particular person. It's set aside like a package, and it comes down to malchus dat tzilus. But over there, it stays there. It doesn't go further. During the year, we tap into that account. It's like a bank account. And every day of the year, you daven, asking for that hashpah to come down, and not just to come down all the way to Olam Asiyah. That means it has to go through Bria, has to go through Yitzira, has to go through Asiyah HaRuchni, and then come down to Asiyah HaGashmi, and come and be materialized in Banei Chaim Mezayna. Banei meaning children, Chaye is life, Mezayna is all kind of Mezaynas. When it says Mezaynosav Shal Adam, Ksuvim L'Rosh Hashanah, that I've explained in the Maimer, that means all of our needs. But we're talking about physical needs. And it will not come down unless we ask for it. It might just stay up in Malchus Tatzilus. So the Rebbe asked the question. It says in L'Kutei Torah, brought from Nagos Maimonides, that on Rosh Hashanah, not only does the Eibishter set aside the hashpah, biklalos in general, but also every detail. If you remember, on page 90, on the bottom of the page, in the footnote 17, let's take a look what it says here in footnote 17. It says, brings from Kuntres that in Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim, it's decided Prate ha'adam al kol Hashana for everything l'chaim chulu v'chein l'chol ha'murais shaloi. Also, everything that's going to happen to the person. In other words, what are we davening for on Rosh Hashanah? We're not just davening that you come down to Malchus Hatzilus. No, finish not. What are we davening for? For Banei Chaim Zayna B'Gashmias. And that's why our tefillos, on Rosh Hashanah Kippur, we're not asking just chesed. We're asking for details for Banei Chaim Zayna. There's so many details we ask for in our tefillos of Rosh Hashanah Kippur. Why? Because then it's decided not only what kind of hashpah the shayrish of my neshama is going to get l'mayla, as my neshama is in Atzilus. We all know that the 5 levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chay, yechida, are connected. They're oilamais. Nefesh is asiyah, ruach is yitzira, neshama is bria, and the chaya and yechida, that's atzilus and kesed. There are 5 levels. And when the Eibishter decides on what I'm getting, decides what's negayah to mamish and asiyah. That's what the Rebbe brought from Agoyis Maimonides from L'Kutei Torah. So the Gashmiistic details are already decided and set aside. So why do we have to daven for them? If they only came b'chlalus, that chunk came down and was put into Malchus Tatzilus, like into my bank account, I can understand. I have to bring it down from Atzilus down to the world. That's why I have to daven. But if Rosh Hashanah Kippur, the Alter Rebbe says, L'Kutei Torah, also the details are decided that it should come down. B'Gashmias mamash. That's why I have to ask for it. It's already decided Rosh Hashanah. The details too. Banei, Chaim, Mezayna, Rebicha. That's what we asked in Seif Dalit. Now we're up to Seif Hey. We're in middle, but since we didn't finish Seif Hey, I'm going to start from the beginning of Seif Hey, at least in short, the few lines that we learned, and then we'll continue weiter in Yetz Hashem. So to understand why do we have to daven every day, even though it's already decided, the Rebbe brings from the Alter Rebbe Siddur. There's a maimer in the Siddur of Dach. In the Siddur, brings a maimer on the pasuk of Lamanatseach Hashmayim Mesaprim that we say on Shabbos. It says there, Yom leYom Yabia Oimer. And the Alter Rebbe explains, Yabia, besides the simple meaning, Yabia also means quickness, something which is quick. When we brought a raya, a mocker for that it comes quick, the mehirus. That on Shabbos, the hashpah comes on the mehirus, quickly. In order to understand this, we have to understand, and why during the week not? It says during the week, there could be an ikuv. There could be a stop-off. It gets stuck. It could be things that will stop the hashpah. What's the ikuv all about? So to understand the ikuv means to hold it back. What is this ikuv? Why could there be during the week an ikuv? They've already decided on Rosh Hashanah. And that's where we're up to. The Rebbe is going to give us a mashal b'nefesh ha'adam. The nefesh ha'adam, if we take a look how it's by us, we'll see, yeah, it makes sense. That's exactly what happens when a person on Rosh Hashanah in Yom Kippurim is like when a person makes up something in his mind. It's a good idea to do so. But when it comes to action, he doesn't do it right away. He has to rejudge and reevaluate, am I going to do it? So there are two levels. There are two levels of machshava, let's say. One level of machshava, where he's just thinking about the idea. Yes, it's a good idea to do. I should give $1,000 tzedakah, bli neder, or I should learn a whole masechta. It's a good idea. Makes sense in his mind. But that's all dealing with the seichel. Even though the seichel is going to approve and say it's a good idea to do it b'asiyah, b'maiseh, b'payil, but it's all in a logical level. It's still in olam ha-seichel. That's one level of machshava. Then there's another level of machshava. That's when you bring it down to, you want to bring it to action. You start asking yourself, how am I going to do it? Let's start from Seif Hey. We're going to go through from Seif Hey and go through the few lines that we learned already, and then we'll go weiter. Yuvan, Alpi Mashakasa B'Sidur, Ala Pasuk Yom L'Yom, Yabiya Imer. It says in Tehillim, Yom L'Yom Yabiya Imer, Shivimei Achoel Yeshnam Kamei Kuvim, Hamshach Zashpal Mateh. In the weekdays, there are some ikuvim that hold back the hashpah. Yom HaShabbos, Hamshachas hashpah, Hi b'mehirus. It goes quickly. And that's what Yabiya Omer means. Yabiya Loshen Mehirus. And like the Rebbe brings some Kurtres in number 20 in the footnotes. Before Sham, in the Siddur of Dach, in that Siddur where the Maimed is, talks about this, it's explained, Zeh should be Mei HaChoil, Efshe Shashpa Tisakev, Leitum Shech Lemata. The fact that in the weekdays, the Hashpa might be withheld, there might be an ikuv. and the Ashpa won't come down Lamata. In order to understand it, says the Alter Rebbe, Marshal, Marshal Adam, Shadon Besichloi, Al Eze Davar. Person is evaluating with his seichel. Person cannot use seichel if he doesn't have machshava. Seichel is one of the kaiches of pnimim that we have. And then we have machshava dibur ha'maisa. Machshava dibur ha'maisa are the tools that we use. But the tool of machshava dibur ha'maisa that we're familiar with, like what it talks about in Perach Daled in Tanya, va'oid yesh l'chol nefesh, machshava dibur ha'maisa, the shloish levushim, machshava dibur ha'maisa, that's talking about a action machshava. That means when you already want to apply it in action, then you use machshava, then you use dibur, use maisa. That we're going to learn in the second paragraph of this seif mitzvah. But then there is a more lofty machshava, which is not really like a levush. It's like it's a tool for the seichel to be able to use the seichel. Person has to have, you can't use your seichel without machshava, but it's on a more lofty, abstract level. It's in a seichel-dik world. And at that point, at that level of his machshava, he's making a cheshbon, imroila soiseim lav, whether to do this thing or he should not do it. Ubala maskana, and he comes to a conclusion at that level of machshava, at the higher level, v'hachlata sheroila soiseim. At that level of his machshava, yeah, it's a good idea. Nevertheless, when it comes to Ma'aseh b'poel, it might just stay in the seichel and never materialize lamata the Ma'aseh b'poel. L'yavod b'Ma'aseh b'poel. Not only it will not necessarily come Ma'aseh b'poel, when it comes to Ma'aseh b'poel, and I rethink it, I might make nuchash vaynos and come to a conclusion not to do it. In other words, the fact that there was a positive feeling about it on the higher level machshava does not obligate me that on the lower level of machshava, when I'm thinking how to do it, that I'm going to do it b'peil mamash. In other words, let's take a look at, take these two levels of machshava. The first level, a higher level, over there, he's making a cheshbon in efshalasai. Is it possible to do? Is it nachaim to do? Is it a good idea? And he has this, he makes that cheshbon, nachaim. When it comes down to the second level of machshava, to the lower level, that's he's thinking, eich, how to apply it. Eich la'asaisai. The eich la'asaisai, how to do it, is not there on the higher level. Higher level is just justifying it. When it comes to the lower level, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to do it. Not only that, not only it doesn't come Ma'aseh b'poel, just because he's lazy or something. No! He made a new cheshbon. You say to me so, when things in the Geil Ma'aseh b'poel, Ushokel b'daito oid pam, makes another evaluation again, im la'asois b'poel k'fi sheichlon t'sichlai. Whether he should do b'poel, the hachlata that he took upon himself on the higher level of machshava. Why do you have to make achlata again? You didn't make the achlata to do it. He didn't talk about, at the first level of machshava, it wasn't that he thought, let me see the seichel of it. Let me see the logic of it. No, it was much more than that. At that level of his machshava, he's thinking, about doing it, but Pearl Mamish. He was thinking whether it's a good idea to do the Pearl Mamish, but he didn't think yet whether I should Mamish apply it. He was just thinking if it's a good idea to do. Even though at the higher level of that achlata in seichel was, we're not talking about thinking of it, contemplating. Was mamish benigeh whether it's lasais to do it. Mikol nakan. Kivan shasiya shenirgisha etzlai ba'achlata sichlai. Because that this asiya that he was feeling in his mind he was picturing himself doing it. He asiya kamay sheklula b'seichel. It was only asiya the way it's nichlal, it's included in seichel. Nothing to do with Pearl Mamish. Lachain, Kishaba Dabali de Maisa Bepoil, when it comes Maisa Bepoil, Maisa Kuhu, Kamaishu Bifnei Atzmai, Nifrad Mea Seichel, not Maisa the way it is in my Seichel, the way I'm playing around with that thought, I'm entertaining the thought of doing it. No, we're talking about when it comes to Maisa, which leaves my body, that means I do the action. It's outside of my seichel. Then tzarich li'isyaitz belodun b'sichlei oid pa'am. He has to rethink it and take counsel with himself and rejudge it. Im la'asos came b'poil, whether he should do so. So there are two things here. U'pratius shnei inyanim b'zeh. There are two things. Number one, whether the hachlata in my seichel is going to come down to action or not. Is it going to make its way down? That's one point. Another point, if it makes its way down, once it's down, is it going to get a green light or a red light? In other words, it might be stopped by customs. He's saying, no, you're not going. You're stuck here. There are two things here. Let's look inside. Shnei inyanim bazeh. Shachlot has haseichel. Sheroi la'asos hadavar. That hachlot that I had in my seichel on the higher level, which told me yes, roi la'asos hadavar, that it's a befitting thing, it's a good thing to do. Eina mechayeves es ha'maisa. Does not mean anything that I'm going to actually do that maisa. Why? The key v'shamaisa kol b'seichel, v'amaisa b'poil. Since the maisa, the way it's still in my seichel before it came down, and then the contrast of it, the maisa b'poil, k'moishu b'fnei atzmei nifrad me'aseichel, the way it's brought down into poil mamash, separate from the seichel, hem shnei inyanim. There are two different entities. Like I think I mentioned last time. There's a saying in Yiddish, Zusagen und liebhaben kostet nicht kein Geld. We're not talking about applying anything. Yes, in the mind is one thing. When it comes to the Ma'aser V'Poel, it's a different thing. Like the guy said, why did he steal it? He says, was steht, steht. Und was liegt auf dem Tisch, nimmt man. It could, whatever says written, yes, it's written, but something laying on the table, I take it. That means the seichel does not affect the action, does not obligate the action to happen. There's shnei inyanim. L'chein efsha. Therefore, it's possible. Sha'achlot ha'sichlis lo'tavi oisel ha'maisa. It's not going to bring to any action. That even on that level of seichel, when he's thinking, wow, this is a good thing to do, he's not even thinking about Maisa B'Poel. He's thinking about the Maisa, whether it's a good action to be done, but it does not affect him. It not necessarily obliges Maisa B'Poil. Not only that, here's the second point. We say to Mizu, Shegan Kishayashivel Adavasa, even if then it will make its way down to the level of Machshava, which is the Negela Maisa, Efshal Liya says, Etzloi Svara Shaloi Lasais. He might come up with a good reason not to do it, not to carry it out. But and he has to reevaluate it. So in other words, there are two things here. We have to get this clear. There are two items here. There is the Maisa, the way it's nichlal in his machshava in seichel. It's in a very abstract and spiritual way. Nothing's happening. I'm only thinking about it. And then it has to make its way down to a Maisa B'Poil, but then I have to think it over 1 second. No, I don't want to do it. I have a svara not to do it. Even though before I already made the achlata. I didn't bring it down to Maisa B'Poil. When it comes to Maisa B'Poil, it needs a new evaluation. So let's get the summary of the Nukuda here that the Rebbe is bringing the Negela Tefillah on Rosh Hashanah and the Tefillah of every day of the year. Tefillah on Rosh Hashanah is like the higher level of Machshava. Yes, they decided you're going to get so much and so much. And he took it from Chesed Atzilus, put it down to Malchus Atzilus. It's set aside for you. Also the details. Yeah. It should come down to you, but when it has to actually be actualized and come down into Olam Asiyah Hagashmi, it needs a new evaluation, whether it should make all its way down. In order to, so this already answers in a way why, even though Hagos Maimonides, Alter Rebbe L'Kutei Torah says that in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur they already decided not only b'chlolus a general chesed for you, but also the details, but it might get stuck. Just like in our minds, we can get stuck. I decided to learn a whole Masechta, bli neder. When it came to Maisa B'Poil, it didn't happen. It never materialized. Why? It got stuck on the way. A new judgment came. Let's take a look, and then let's see the next paragraph. In order to understand the Nimshal better, by Rosh Hashanah, the Tefillah of Rosh Hashanah, and the Tefillahs of all the day, let's go a little deeper into Nefesh HaAdam. Let's understand the garments of Machshava Dibur and Maisa a little better, specifically the Levush HaMachshava. Hine asay the shlosh levushay hanefesh u'machshava dibur u'maisa. It's not only we have 3 levushim. There is a seder mesuda, and before a person does anything or says anything, first thing is machshava. Then it goes down to dibur, speaks about it, and then it goes down to maisa, to action. I thought about giving the person tzedakah, I spoke about it, and then I brought it into action. But chdei sheyitiyeh ha'amshacha me'aseichel oy me'amidus lemaisa b'ayidei ha'machshava v'hadibur. If I want to reach Maisa B'Poil, I have to go through the 3 stages: machshava, dibur, and the maisa. You can't just go straight to Maisa. You have to think. You never heard of a person doing something without thought. Has to go machshava, dibur, and then Maisa. Oh, yeah, you can ask a question. We don't need all 3 levushim. Sometimes you can have a thought and not use dibur and go straight to Maisa. So why is the Rebbe saying you have to go through machshava, dibur, and ma'isa? So it's explained the Chassidus, and we're not going to go into it right now, that even a person who goes from machshava straight to ma'isa, the ruchnius, there is a union of dibur going on. There are oisius there involved. So it goes through the concept of dibur too. A kol panim, the seder is machshava, dibur, and ma'isa. Now, like we learned before, and we have to keep this clear, a distinction between both kinds of machshava. Machshava on the abstract level, and machshava when it comes to ma'isa b'poyim. When we're talking about the shloisha levushe hanefesh, to bring something into action, you know which level of machshava we're talking about here? The lower level, where you're thinking about how to do it. It's like, I remember going a mivtzoyim, trying to get the guy to put on tefillin. I said to him, yeah, let's put on tefillin. Are you a righty or you're a lefty? And he laughed. He says, you're already going to whether it's righty or lefty. I didn't even say yes. You're already talking about righty or lefty. The yes is in the higher level of machshava. The how is on the lower level of machshava when it comes to action. Machshava dibur ma'isa. Machshava sha'al yada nimshach lahadibur v'ma'isa hishechoyshev eich la'asais. The level of machshava that I'm using to come, which comes down to dibur and then to ma'isa. What's the pshat of that machshava? Not whether it's a good idea to do. Eich la'asais. I'm doing it. Question is how. V'kivan shemachshava zu, and since this machshava, the eich la'asais machshava, the how to do it, in nifredas me'aseichel, it's separate from the seichel. Shamachshava shoyis etz le'tchila kishedan b'sichloi. Because the machshava on the first level, on the abstract level, when he was thinking about it, and he was machlit on that level, yes, it's a good idea to do. What is that saying here? When it's on the higher level of machshava, machshava is just like a servant to the seichel. What's felt by the person? The seichel, not the machshava. Even though he's using machshava, you can't have seichel without machshava. But what is going on in your mind and your feeling? What are you experiencing? Seichel. Machshava is just a tool. So it's totally batal to the seichel. What stands out is the seichel, the lamdas, the understanding, the logic, why it's a good idea to be done. But it's not machshava as a levush to bring them to action. That's why hoysa betela la seichel, this machshava at that higher level is totally batal to the seichel, which means Ledion haseichel l'achlotasai, to the judgment and decision of the seichel. B'inyana shel hamachshava hu, what's the whole purpose of this higher level of machshava? Rak shal yada nirgash haseichel, just to be able to put onto your plate the seichel. You should understand. You should be able to eat it, digest it. Without machshava, I can't. Without the machshava, I can't use my seichel. But it has nothing to do with action. So that's the higher level of machshava. Masha einkein hamachshava eich lasais umahus b'fnei atzmai shenifrat ma'aseichel. It's not completely batal to the seichel. It has nothing to do with the seichel. It's once it got permission to be done, and it comes down to the lower level of machshava. That level of machshava is called the application machshava. The machshava to apply it in Ma'aseh B'Poel. And that level of machshava is mamash levush, which is separate from the seichel. Because we know, person has 10 koiches, seichel and midas, and then he has levushim, which are his tools. The tools are not the koiches hanefesh, and the koiches hanefesh are not the tools. They're not the garments. The machshava at the lower level is a tool, a garment through which a person can think how to do it, and then dibur, talk about it. L'chein ha'hamshacha me'achlatas ha'seichel lahamachshava la'aseis. Therefore, when you have to go from achlatas ha'seichel on the higher level of machshava, bring it down lahamachshava la'aseis, hi al yedei ikuv. There is an ikuv. It's being withheld, stopped, which means you have to go through customs. Do you get a green light or a red light? Now, in the same two aspects like mentioned before. Number one, that whatever I decided up here in the higher level machshava, not necessarily is going to make its way down to the lower level of machshava to do it in action. Number two, it might even end up that on the lower level of machshava, my reevaluation will say, no, red light, we're not doing it. Sha'achlatas ha'seichel eina mechayeves es machshava. The achlata that I had on the higher level does not obligate that the machshava on the lower level, who should be a machshava la'asais, to do, be a seder mizu. And here's even more so. Here's the second piece. Shebechdei lahan shechoinyin b'machshava tzarach l'denoit pam. He has to reevaluate. Am I going to do it? Am I not going to do it? Red light or green light? That is what takes place when you're talking about from the higher level of machshava coming down to the lower level of machshava. It needs a re-evaluation. Here, the Rebbe is giving us a mashal nefesh ha'adam. What is the meaning of ikuv? Ikuv means it's being withheld, has to be re-evaluated. And a person might end up saying no, might end up saying yes. There, in machshava, when it comes to the lower level of machshava, and then of course dibur, and then ma'aseh, you could tell a person, you can't tell a person to love something. You can explain it, and he'll understand it. Then he'll understand that it's kedai to love. It's a good word, good reason to love it. You can't force a person to understand a seichel if he doesn't get it. You could present it to him, and he will understand with his own seichel. So was his machshava up there on that level caused him to understand it? No. It's he himself. There's a shinui, a change in himself. Before he didn't understand it, he didn't know the details. Now he understands it. Or the midos. You can't give a person midos. Because if he starts loving it, there was a shinui in his pnimius. In himself, it has nothing to do with that machshava. Masha Enkein, when you're talking about machshava deeper than ma'aseh, when it comes to ma'aseh b'poel on the lower level, when it comes to action, application, you can tell a person, think about pink elephants. He wasn't thinking about it, but you could tell him to think about it. You could tell him say something that he really didn't think of saying. You could say this thing. We want Mashiach now. Of course he wants Mashiach, but you got him to say it. In other words, machshava dibur ma'aseh when it's on the application level, you can, the machshava dibur u'maisa can get you to do something, but superficially. It's not as a chal by them. It's not that I'm at that level. You can tell a kid to say the word atzilus. Does he feel atzilus? But the Alter Rebbe, when he wanted to say the word atzilus, he had so much hisrakshus, so emotional, that he was only able to say the word oiben. But when he wanted to write the word atzilus, he wrote only aleph tzadik yud. Because he lived it. In other words, to sum it up, what the Rebbe is telling us, that we're talking about two levels of machshava, and to bring from one level to the next, there's an ikov in between. It has to go through customs. The same thing says the Rebbe. Now let's take the next step. We have four levels here. Let's get this clear. Machshava on the abstract level, machshava on the application level, dibur, which is surely close to application, and ma'aseh b'poel. You have four levels. So to go from the top level to the second level, machshava on the abstract level, to machshava on the practical level, there's an equal. Now the Rebbe is going to tell us that also from machshava to dibur, the lower level of machshava, come to dibur, also there's customs. Might be a red light, might be a green light. The guy might decide, no, I don't want to bring it into dibur. I'm not going to share this. I have it in my mind, but I'm not going to speak about it. And the same thing from dibur to ma'aseh, person might speak about it. When it comes to action, says, no, I'm not going to do it. In other words, there is a re-evaluation by each step. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. What does 4 remind us? The 4 worlds, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. When the Hashpah comes from Chesed Atzilus to Malchus Atzilus, that's like Machshava on the higher level. Now it has to come down to the lower levels. And there's going to be an ikov between Atzilus and Bria, Bria to Yitzira, Yitzira to Asiya, until Asiya Gashmis. That's how the Moshel and Imshal goes. So we should understand what an ikov is. Ikov doesn't mean that you're not getting it. It means it has to be reevaluated. And sometimes, like we said earlier in the Maimer, it might end up stuck in Yitzira, never made its way down for whatever reason. Let's look inside. When it comes to machshava, to go down to the level of dibur, dibur is lower than machshava. Machshava is for the person himself. Dibur, why does a person speak? L'zulasai, to share what you know to another person. Whatever you want to say. You don't need, there's no purpose of speaking to yourself to share information. When is dibur needed? When you have to share information. So machshava and dibur are two worlds, two different things. And because they're two different things, so you have to go from one world to the next world. To make that step, you have to go through customs. You have to check it through. The kivasha dibru lamata me machshava, the machshava ilaatzmai ba'dibur hu l'zulasai. Machshava is for yourself, and speaking is to the other person. Lachein hamshacha shemi machshava l'dibur u'ahi al yedei ikuv. That's why the hamshacha that has to come from machshava to dibur, there's an ikuv. This also has both aspects. Which two things we spoke about? Whether it'll make its way down. And number two, when it gets down there, does it get a red light or a green light? Machshava might never make its way down to dibur. I was thinking about it, but I'm not going to talk about it. Could be able to stay. Oh, it's a good thought I have in my mind. I'm not even thinking about bringing it down to dibur. Not even. It's not even coming to my thoughts, not entering my mind. Should I talk about it? Not only that, but you say to me so. Even let's say it enters my mind about speaking about it and sharing it b'dibur to someone. Should I or shouldn't I? Yeshetz le'safik. He's doubtful. But tzarich v'leis yaitz b'lodei nazeh. He has to reevaluate. Is it kedai to go from my machshava to dibur? Why shouldn't I? Why should I have a suffix? Because they're two worlds, machshava and dibur. Machshava, like I said before, is la'atzmai, and dibur is l'zulasai. Two different worlds. Do I want to bring my things out of my house and put it outside? Do I want to expose what I'm thinking about? The key of machshava, since machshava is something which is for yourself, the dibur is for the other person. Chaim. So they're two different worlds, and that's why gam la'achri shehichlit negeya lemachshava. Even if he already has the achlata, it's a good idea to think about this thought, this idea. It's a good idea to be done. But who says I want to bring it down? He's doubting himself whether he should bring it down on dibur legalis l'zalasai. Whether I should bring it out to the open and share it with someone. Same thing, the way is from machshava to dibur is also between dibur and ma'aseh. In other words, there are customs all the way through. It's called the ikuv. Al derech zehu ba'amshach mit dibur l'ma'aseh. Now we're talking about dibur to ma'aseh. For sure, there has to be a reevaluation. The key v'sham ma'aseh. Nifred Yosef. Me'adibur, Maisa is even further away from the nefesh than dibur. Machshava and dibur are closer to each other. But Maisa, for sure, it's nifrad. Lachein, hamshachem et dibur l'maisa yal yedei ikov. That's why to bring down from dibur to Maisa, there is also an ikov. B'shnei inyanim anal. In both aspects, like mentioned before. Number one, shadibur eino mechayves ha'maisa. Talking about it does not mean that I'm going to do it. Suzagen kostnish kein Geld. I mean, I can promise from today to tomorrow. Of course, it's moitza, it's v'sachat tishmer. But if I talk about it, it doesn't mean I'm going to do it. V'shepechdei lahamshech medibur l'maisa. And if I do want to bring it down to action from my dibur, tzarich li'isyaitz v'lodem oid pam. He has to reevaluate it again. Just like from the higher level of machshava to the lower level of machshava. From machshava on the lower level to dibur. The same thing with dibur to ma'aseh. Now the Rebbe is going to add one more vart. Al pi ha'yedua, shemachshava v'dibur shayachim zel hazeh. Machshava and dibur are much closer to each other than Maisa is. Maisa is completely separated from us. Where do we see that machshava and dibur are close to each other? Because the same oisius that you had in your machshava are the same words you're going to talk. You don't say different words. You formulate what words, how you're going to express the idea that you had in machshava. The oisim ha'oisis, shahoyu tchila b'machshava, nimshachim achakach b'dibur. I can't say the word table if I didn't think about the word table first. It has to first be in my machshava. So machshava and dibur, they have a closer relationship to each other. They're both from this. They're machshava and dibur. They share the same oisius. It's a total different thing. Therefore, we can say, since Maisa is even further away, then when we're talking about an ikov between dibur and Maisa, it's a stronger ikov. The two things, whether we'll make it down and whether we'll get a red light or a green light. Well, ikov gadol yoseh, it's a bigger ikov between dibur and Maisa. Meha ikov b'hamshachim machshava l'dibur. It's even a bigger ikov than from machshava to dibur. This will all gives us an understand what's this ikov all about. The Rebbe says in the Siddur that during the week there could be ikuvim. There's something set aside for this person, and it's not making its way down. It made its way down halfway, 3/4. It came down, like the Rebbe is going to bring that later on, that Bria, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira Asiya correspond to these levels. And just like these levels have an ikuv, the same thing, there could be an ikuv between Atzilus to Bria, Bria to Yetzira, Yetzira to Asiya. What's the nimshal? This is the nimshal that we're learning from this mashal. Just like by a person, there's an ikuv. The same thing is also when it has to come down to Maisa B'Poil. There's a very interesting sikha from the Rebbe. I think it's in Tafshin Yud or Yud Aleph. The Rebbe speaks about, it says that the Eibishter doesn't give more than one key at a time to even the greatest tzaddik. There's 3 keys: Banei, Chaya, and Mezayna. What's Banei, Chaya, and Mezayna? All 3 things that we must have. And maybe she says, I'm not going to give all 3 to anyone. I'm not going to give 2 to anyone. I'll give only 1 at a time. You want rain? Good. I'll give you the schlüssel, the key to rain. Oh, you want Chaya? You want Mezayna? You want Banei? Nevertheless, and why? Because I'll say, because it's not right. The master should have only 1 key and gave 2 keys away to his servant. So it's not right. The servant should have more keys than the master. That's why the Eibishter only gives 1 at a time. Yet, the Rebbe says, a Yid comes into Yechidus to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe benches for Banei, Chaya, Mezayna, Revicha. How is that possible? So there's a whole arichas in the Sikha, the Rebbe explains it. The Kudah is that Rebbe is not a separate entity. Like it says, Benigeya Terashbi, Ano Simona Ba'alma. I'm just the sign of Elokus, a simon. Not a Metzias B'fnei Atzma. And that's why a Rebbe can be what a Rebbe is. He has all the koiches that he gets from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's a Sikha Muga. I think it's the Chelik Beis or Chelik Dalet. More likely in Likutei Sichos Chelik Dalet. The Rebbe tells about the Frierdiker Rebbe, whose Chag HaGola is that when they came in, the officer came in, the Frierdiker Rebbe was davening, he walked out. So the Frierdiker Rebbe just went like this and he left. Can you imagine? When an officer comes in, you're supposed to stand up. And it was completely bottled the Metzias. How's it possible? And the Rebbe says, Amazet Atzmus Mohus Ongetanu Natalis, you become totally nullified. That's why, that explains the kesha that the Rebbe has with all of us. The Rebbe cares about all of us. The Rebbe thinks about us much more than we think about him. It says in our Yom Yom 3 times a day. The Rebbeim Mamish, they think about us. I remember there was a Fabrengen that the Rebbe once called out and said, Avram Yitzchak Glick. Called him by his name. A shliach from the Rebbe in Europe. He called him, I think, more than once. And the question that was presented to the Rebbe knew that this guy was not in New York. He wasn't by the Fabrengen. I think maybe Rebbe Chadakov asked the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, I knew. It was necessary to mention his name by the Fabrengen. The Rebbe pays attention to every one of us, without exception. And he knows who's coming, who's going, and what we're doing. There's a Maisa I'd like to finish with. Was once an army general who came to the Rebbe, and I don't remember the details 100%, but the Nukuda, this is exact. And he spoke to the Rebbe about the fallen soldiers. They had a certain mission that they had to do. And these were the elite, Shebe elite of the soldiers in Israel. Nobody knew who they are. Nobody even knew that they fell in the war. And the guy said to the Rebbe, 35 soldiers. I think he said the number 35. And the Rebbe said, excuse me, you mean 36. The Rebbe corrected the number. And the general said, excuse me, I know it's 35 because nobody else knows about this. And he was surprised how the Rebbe not only knows about it, but was correcting him. When he came back to Israel, he said, I got to investigate this. And he asked, and he found out that one of the soldiers was not on his list. I don't remember why, maybe because he was even more elite, but there were actually 36 that fell. So then either he wrote to the Rebbe or he came back to the Rebbe in Yechidus. He says, how did the Rebbe know? I'm in charge of them, and I didn't even know. How is it that the Rebbe knew? The Rebbe said, every neshama that comes down to this world or leaves this world goes through this room. We know how much the Rebbe cares about us, mentions us, gives us brachas, and the Rebbe makes sure that there are no ikuvim. The brachas that the Rebbe gave us will materialize for all of us, for Klal Yisrael, the greatest bracha, the bracha of the Geula Amitis V'Ashlema. And since now Shari Geula are open because it's Chag Geula, it's easy to push through and get ready. The Geula Amitis V'Ashlema, the Mashiach Tzidkenu, which the Rebbe said, as we know, in the famous Sicha, where he spoke about Shemesh B'Givain Doim, the Rebbe said that the Geula of Gimel Tammuz was a haschala for the Geula of Yud Beis Tammuz, which was followed by the Geula of all the Yidden who were in Russia behind so-called Iron Curtain, and this eventually will bring the Geula Amitis Vashlema. Amen. Let's finish by giving a coin to tzedakah, Gedoyle tzedakah, Shmekareves Geula, the Chaim Lebracha.
Amen.